What's up, John Sonmez here from SimpleProgrammer.com. Why I dropped out of college as a programmer, yet I still ended up making millions of dollars. So stay tuned and get ready to ask your questions in the comments, because I know there's going to be a lot of them. I'm John from SimpleProgrammer.com, and welcome to the place on the web to learn how to be a better software developer, more specifically, how to unnerd yourself, be a cool software developer, and learn those social skills that you need to really succeed in your career. So today what I'm talking about is dropping out of college. So I dropped out of college. I went to college only for a year, and I'm going to tell you kind of my story, and I'm going to tell you why I did that. And why, it might make sense for you as well. I went to college, and I went to a university called Boise State University in Boise, Idaho. Okay, and I went there pretty much right out of high school. I stayed in the dorms there. It was a good time. It was fun. I got into a little bit of trouble, but I went in as a CS major. Okay. And before then, I had been doing a lot of programming on my own, right? I think I started off, the very first programming I did was an Apple IIe computer, like in grade school. I remember making, the classic 10 go to, write, hello, this never ends, 20, go to 10, run, and it just goes and goes and goes. And that was when I was hooked on programming, when I realized I could just make all the computers say random shit in an infinite loop. And so that's how I got started. Later on, I ended up creating my own MUD, taking like the source code from a MUD and learning C, just kind of teaching myself C and C++ by looking at C code. It was not the best way to do that, but there was no internets back then. Not really. There was like very little. There was no real World Wide Web. Okay, this is going to date me a bit, but I had like Telnet. All right, there was like Mosaic was just kind of coming on to the scene, but there was nowhere you could find like C++ resources. Okay, even the library was pretty light on that. Okay, but I had taught myself some C. I finally got some C books and some C++ books. So I went to college, went to university first year. Okay, enroll in a Java course, and I know some Java, and it is just boring as shit. Okay, it is like we're using iterators. I still remember, and we're like learning how to write enumerations and use iterators to go through loops, and then we're doing like a fucking sorting algorithm, and it's just really, really complicated, really tedious shit. And I'm like, where's the fun here? I want to make some games. I want to build some applications. I don't want to like do all of the shit on just trying to iterate through a damn loop in Java. Okay, and so that was my kind of first experience with the school and with the university. And then I had all these other classes. I had a mathematics class, and then I had all these other classes I had to take. And all I wanted to do was code. I didn't want to do all of this bullshit. I just wanted to code. I only had one class that was coding, really. Another one was like, operating system theory and things like that. And that was kind of interesting, but really I wanted to become a better programmer. That's what I came there for. And so I went through the first year, and honestly, my grades were not that great, especially in the CS course. I just wasn't motivated, didn't want to do the work. Eventually I, ended up just saying, okay, well, fuck, I'm just going to do the best I can, and did a good job on it, of course, and passed through. But I ended up going to a summer job, okay? And so, when the semester was over, I needed to get a job for the summer. So I actually interviewed at HP as a contractor for this contract position. And it's kind of funny how I got the job. Is it was a testing / programming job, and the two guys that were running that were like the leads for that, they interviewed me, and they started asking me questions about testing, a little bit about programming and whatnot, even though they didn't really have much programming knowledge. But then they started asking me if I ever heard of a game called EverQuest. I was like, yeah, I've heard of that. They're like, well, do you play it? And I said, well, no, but I'd like to. It's like, would you play it? And I'm like, yeah, I'd play it. They're like, okay, you're hired. They wanted just, another EverQuest buddy. So I got into that job. Obviously I was qualified for the job, but that ended up becoming really the deciding factor, was could I get along? And this is kind of a lesson, right, for you guys that are looking for a job, is that it's not all about just like having the technical skills and being qualified for the job. A lot of it is like, you're going to be working with these people every day. A lot of your coworkers, you're going to see more than anyone else in your life. And so a lot of it is a good fit, right? So when you're going for an interview, think about, really getting the interviewer to like you, right? You're going to have to be friends because you're going to be working with that person, and that's a lot of what they're going to consider. And we have this bias, right, where we will basically view someone as, in a more positive light if we like them, right? It's the halo effect kind of, is people that we find attractive, but it's still the same type of concept, right? If an interviewer likes you, they're gonna, even if you bomb the interview, like if you're not as good technically, right, they're going to find reasons why, why you really did answer that question, even though it wasn't quite right, or, they're basically going to kind of come up reasons why you're better than you are. Okay, and if they dislike you, they're going to do the opposite. You could ace an interview, and if an interviewer dislikes you, they're going to come up with all kinds of reasons why you're not a good fit. What ended up happening was I got this job, okay, and I ended up getting promoted up to a programming test position where I was writing test cases, like programming tests in what was it, like PCL and PostScript, right? And then a little bit of C, like batch scripts that I was writing, these bash scripts, like corn shell scripts and whatnot. And so I ended up, getting a better job there, right, during the summer that was paying pretty well. And I think it was paying at that time, it was like, $25 an hour, which was like, what, $50K a year or something like that. And at that time, that was what I expected to get out of college, right? So I, basically I was left with this choice. I was like, okay, I can go back, I can go to school. In fact, when I was in that CS class, I was seriously thinking about switching my major to IT, to IT systems, because I did not want to go through more computer science if this was what computer science was going to be. It was this boring fucking shit, doing algorithms and creating sort algorithms and all of this shit, right? Instead, I wanted to write games, I wanted to write software, I wanted to do something interesting. I was making about as much money as I expected to make out of college, right? At that time, you could kind of expect to make $40,000 or $50,000 a year out of college. That was like a pretty good salary, maybe $60,000, right? If you're lucky, and that's it, all right? And so I had this dilemma. I said, okay, well, I'm already making this money, and I'm already, I'm climbing up, I'm getting experience, and I'm actually coding. Every day I'm going to my desk and I'm writing fucking code. Whereas when I go to school, what am I doing? I'm like, doing stupid classes, and I'm doing, stuff that is not really like, it's more theoretical, right? It's not actually writing code. I was writing production code that was going into printers and that was testing printers at HP. To me, that was a no-brainer. So I ended up basically saying, okay, I'm going to drop out of school and I'm just going to go down this road. I could have gone to school, right? Maybe I could have learned some more and become a better developer and had some roots, some stronger roots. But I would have then got out of college, and then I would have been looking for a job, and I would have probably been taking a very similar job to what I had then, right? Because if you're fresh out of college, you're not going to get a senior developer job, right? You're going to get a basic junior or an entry level or an internship type of job. Okay, so that was my choice. Otherwise, I could continue what I was doing, and for the next 3 years, instead work my way up at the company that I was working for and continue to gain experience. And by the time that my peers that were going through the CS major got out of college, I would already have 3 years of actual solid work experience, and I'd probably be in a much better position. What ended up happening was that I think about a year later, not even a year, I got an offer for a job to work at Xerox, because I had now some printer experience and I understood printer languages, which was a rare specialty, rare thing that most developers didn't have. So they offered me this job making $75 an hour in Southern California. So I packed up my shit, I moved to Southern California, and now I was making like $150,000 a year at like 19, 20 years old, okay? And so it just went on and on from there. So that was a much, much better choice. So again, I'm not saying that necessarily you have to drop out of college, okay? But I'm telling you why I did. I didn't just listen to people that said, oh, you need to go to school, you need to get a college degree, all right? And I'll tell you, when I did that, my parents were not too happy about that, all right? A lot of people thought I was an idiot, but I ran the numbers. I did the math myself. I realized that I didn't need this degree. Now, just to wrap up the story, I did end up going back to college. Okay, I went back to college, but I took night school. I did like a remote correspondence school, and I got my degree from a university called ACCIS. I think they merged with like Sentinel University. They're non-accredited, okay? So it wasn't even an accredited degree, but, you know, I figured, hey, I might as well get a CS degree. And, you know, I went through and I did all the courses, and it was super easy because I already was, you know, C++. I was already like a senior software engineer, an expert in C++ at the time. And so I probably knew more than the professors did because I had a lot more applicable work experience than the professors. So it was a breeze to get the degree after that. But, you know, it was just a paper. It never really served me. It didn't really help me in my career. What did help me was actually being good, being a good programmer and having the knowledge. That's my story. If you haven't already, click that subscribe button down below and join Simple Programmer. You know, if you're interested to hear more about my story and my career and stuff and how I made millions of dollars as a software developer, definitely click the subscribe button because there's a lot more stories coming. I've got a really good book that you should read called The Complete Software Developer Career Guide. It is the most comprehensive book there is on a software developer career. I guarantee you that I specifically wrote the book to be that, and it's an 800-page book. Hope you enjoyed that story. I'll talk to you next time. Take care.